The Disappearance of Rituals, A Topology of the Present, by Byung-Chul Han. We can define rituals as symbolic techniques of making oneself at home in the world. They transform being in the Word into a being at home. They turn the world into a reliable place. They are to time what is a home to a space. The contemporary compulsion to produce, rob things of their endurance. It intentionally erodes duration in order to increase production, to force more consumption. Emotions are more fleeting than things. They therefore do not stabilize life. In consuming emotions, we do not relate to things but to ourselves. What we seek is emotional authenticity. Thus, the consumption of emotions strengthens the narcissistic relationship to ourselves. Neoliberalism often makes use of morality for its own ends. Moral values consumed as marks of distinction. The disappearance of symbols points towards the increasing atomization of society. At the same time, society is becoming increasingly narcissistic. The narcissistic process of internalization develops an aversion to form. Objective forms are avoided in favor of subjective states. Symbolic perception is gradually being replaced by a serial perception that is incapable of producing the experience of duration. Serial perception, the constant registering of the new, does not linger. Rather, it rushes from one piece of information to the next, from one experience to the next, from one sensation to the next, without ever coming to closure. Intensity is giving way to extensivity. Digital communication is extensive communication, it does not establish relationships, only connections. The permanent process of updating, which has now extended to all areas of life, does not allow the development of any duration or allow for any completion. Unlike emotions and affects, feelings can be collective. Digital communication, however, is predominantly affect-based, it tends towards the immediate outpouring of affect. Twitter is an affective medium, and the politics based on it is an affective politics. Politics is reason and mediation. Reason, which is time-intensive, is currently being replaced by immediate affect. In the post-industrial age, the noise of the machines gives way to the noise of communication. More information and more communication holds out the promise of more production. Thus, the compulsion of production expresses itself in the compulsion of communication. In the cult of authenticity, the neoliberal regime appropriates the person himself, and turns him into a highly efficient site of production. The whole person is incorporated into production process. The 19th century discovered work, and play became increasingly distrusted. There was now much more work than play, the world resembled a factory rather than a theatre. The culture of theatrical presentation gave way to the culture of interiority. This development can also be seen in fashion. Stage costumes and ordinary clothes began to differ more and more. The theatrical element disappeared from fashion. Europeans started to wear work clothes. With the rise of the cult of authenticity, tattoos have also become fashionable again. Within a ritual context, they symbolize the alliance between the individual and community. In the 19th century, when tattoos were very popular, especially among the upper classes, the body was still a surface onto which yearnings and dreams were projected. Today, tattoos lack any symbolic power, all they do is to point to the uniqueness of the bearer. The body is neither a ritual stage nor a surface of projection, rather it is an advertising space. The neoliberal hell of same is populated with tattooed clones. The cult of authenticity erodes public space, which disintegrates into private spaces. Everyone carries their own private space with them whenever they go. In public space, one has to leave aside the private and play a role. Politeness is an as-if ritual. Culture, as such, is made up of as-if rituals. If we remove the as-if gestures in the name of authenticity or genuineness, we destroy the element of civilization. A ritual of politeness is not an expression of subjective feeling, it is an objective act. It resembles a magical invocation that produces a positive mental state. In culture of raging narcissism, playfulness disappears, and life loses its cheerfulness and exuberance. Rituals make the world objective, they mediate our relation to the world. The compulsion of authenticity, by contrast, makes everything subjective, thereby intensifying narcissistic tendencies. The ritual spaces that make possible playful and ceremonial exuberance have been eroded. They have become spaces of excess and extravagance that stand out against profane everyday life. Culture has been made profane. The excess of opening up and removal of boundaries is present at all levels of society. This is the imperative of neoliberalism. Globalization also dissolves all closed structures in order to accelerate the circulation of capital, commodities, and information. It removes boundaries, decites the word, turning it into global market. Rituals give form to the essential transitions of life. They are forms of closure. Without them, we slip through. Thus, we age without growing old, or we remain infantile consumers who never become adults. The discontinuity of autonomous time gives way to the continuity of production and consumption. Rest belongs to the sphere of the sacred. Work, by contrast, is a profane activity that must be wholly absent from the religious act. Rest and work represent two fundamentally different existential forms. They are divided by an ontological, even a theological difference. Rest is not merely recovery from work, not it is a preparation for further work. Rather, it transcends work, and it must in no way come into contact with work. This is because work is an eminent form of profane activity. It has no other apparent end than to provide for the temporal necessities of life, it puts us in relations with ordinary things only. If rests become a form of recovery from work, as is the case today, it loses its specific ontological value. It no longer represents an independent, higher form of existence, and degenerates into derivative of work. Today's compulsion of production perpetuates work and thus eliminates that sacred silence. Life becomes entirely profane, desecrated. As forms of play, festivals are self-representation of life. They are characterized by an excess, an expression of an overflowing life that does not aim at a goal. This is what lies behind their intensity. They are an intense form of life. In the festivals, life relates to itself instead of subordinating itself to external purpose. Thus, time that is completely dominated by the compulsion of production, the sort of time we inhabit today, is a time without festival. Life becomes impoverished, it freezes into mere survival. A festival founds a community among humans and between humans and gods, it allows humans to participate in the divine. It brings forth intensities. The God embody precisely the intensities of human life. Life that exhausts itself in work and production is an absolutely atrophied life. The temporality of the event is that of the eventuality. It is accidental, arbitrary, and non-committal. Rituals and festivals, however, are anything but contingent and non-committal. Eventuality is the temporality of the contemporality society of the event. In contrast to festivals, events do not create communities. Today's popular festivals have become mass events, and masses are not communities. Capitalism is often interpreted as a religion. However, if religion is understood in terms of religiare, as something to binds, then capitalism is anything but a religion because it lacks any force to assemble, to create community. Money, by itself, has an individualizing and isolating effect. It increases my individual freedom by liberating me from any personal bond to others. I can have someone else work for me by paying her, and this avoids entering into personal relationship.